1200. It was designed to be a knockout blow to keep this country out of the war in the Pacific. 3 years and 10 months later, on September 2nd, 1945, Japan unconditionally surrendered to the United States on the decks of Battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Also in Tokyo that day was the USS Ren destroyer. On that ship was my father, Navy Lieutenant, junior grade Joey Burgum. It's hard to imagine the emotions of all of those sailors and soldiers that had survived the horrors of World War II, and hard to imagine the emotions of my dad, who coincidentally was also celebrating his 28th birthday on that same day, after having been apart from my mom for years. But today, Japan is one of our most strategic partners, a country where democracy and peace and free markets have thrived for 77 years. They have 126 million people living in a space that's just the size of North and South Dakota. And yet they import nearly 100% of their oil and gas and almost 2/3 of their food. During the recent trade mission to Japan, our delegation of Ag Commissioner Doug Goring, North Dakota CEOs, leaders from UND and NDSU and others, we had the opportunity that week to present our state's story about our abundance of oil, of gas, of coal, strength of our agriculture, our unmanned aerial systems and technology, our incredible carbon storage capacity, and more. During a presentation to a national Japanese Chamber of Commerce group that represented some of the largest and biggest companies in Japan, the chairman of that group said to all of us, "We're envious of North Dakota." And I'll say that again. This country, with one of the largest economies in the world, said, "We are envious of North Dakota. You have a young and growing population. You've got energy security. You've got food security. And you've got national security." And of course, this was driven home because the week that we were there, the North Koreans had launched a missile over the top of the country of Japan. And if a missile was going to go back at North Korea, it would come from North Dakota, from our own Minot Air Force Missile Wing. And of course, here we are with our deeply blessed with the enormous and abundant God-given resources that we have, our rich soil, our enormous water resources, our jackpot of geology, which have been the foundation of our state and its economic prosperity. But none of this would be possible without those that fought for freedom. As today we honor Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, but we also want to recognize all military currently serving or who have served. And if those in our chamber could please stand today that have served our country, let us give you our acknowledgement and recognition for everything you've done for our United States. Today, we find ourselves in competition with every other state for attracting capital and talent. And because of that, we need a comprehensive strategic budget that builds on our competitive advantages, supports our families and communities, attracts and retains thriving, healthy, well-educated citizenry, and sets North Dakota up for the long-term success in the realities of this exciting 21st century economy. Therefore, on behalf of Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, myself, and our whole team, it is our distinct honor to present to you the executive budget for the 2023-2025 biennium. It's a beautiful day here in North Dakota, clear and sunny and cold, just like some of us like it. And here we are at this beautiful Capitol. And I want to say welcome to each and every member of the 68th Legislative Assembly, the esteemed justices of the Supreme Court, of course, our amazing Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, and Second Lady Sandy Sanford, who's here, and of course, our courageous First Lady, Catherine Helgus Burgum, our terrific statewide electeds who are here joining us upstairs, our dedicated cabinet leaders, our hardworking state team members, and fellow North Dakotans, including all those across the state that are joining us online. Before we begin, I want to give two quick special shout outs. And first is wraps up his service as our second longest Secretary of State. Entails not only overseeing elections, but a broad set of other duties, including serving on the State Historical Society Board, the Land Board, the Emergency Commission. I want to thank Secretary of State Al Jaeger for 30 years of commitment, dedication, integrity. Secretary Jaeger, please stand. Secondly, we're honored to have joining us here today one of the greatest servant leaders in our state's history. On January 31st, Justice Jerry Vanderwall will retire after 64 years of service to the state of North Dakota, including 44 years on the North Dakota Supreme Court, 27 of those years as our Chief Justice. Please join me in acknowledging Justice Vanderwall for his selfless and incomparable dedication to justice to this great state. Thank you, Jerry. As the branches of government embark together on this journey over the next 5 months, we do so with an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the service of our legislative leaders who retired from their roles last week. House Majority Leader Chet Pollard, Senate Majority Leader Rich Wardner, Senate Minority Leader Joan Heckman, for their service and the service of all legislators who are present in these chambers who will be missed but not forgotten. They all have our deepest gratitude. Thank you to those outgoing leaders. And of course, today we welcome the 37 newly elected legislators who were sworn in this week and our 104 returning legislators. Welcome back. We look forward to working with all of you, including your recently elected leaders, House Majority Leader Mike LaFleur, Senate Majority Leader David Hogue, House Minority Leader Josh Boucher, Senate Minority Leader Kathy Hogan, and your Appropriations Chairs, Senator Brad Beckedahl and Representative Don Digasaw. We'd now like to ask, in addition to acknowledging the leadership, that our state's newest 37 legislators please stand and be welcome. Welcome, new legislators. Congratulations to all of you. We look very much forward to working with you. We also want to thank the thousands of members of Team North Dakota who continue to deliver on our administration's purpose, empowering people, improving lives, and inspiring success. It is the hard work of these North Dakota team members that allows us to deliver on the programs and services that are initiated by the legislature in this body to serve the citizens of our great state. As the executive branch, we have a constitutional and statutory duty to deliver a budget and recommended legislation to this body. We are deeply appreciative of the small and mighty band of analysts in the Office of Management Budget, all of our cabinet leaders and their fiscal teams, the governor's office policy team, our statewide elected officials and their teams, and all the state agencies for their steady work to drive what we believe is our best yet strategic planning effort, which of course underpins this budget, a process that began over 11 months ago. I'd like to extend a special note of gratitude to OMB Director Joe Morissette as he transitions toward retirement from state government next spring. For nearly 30 years in state government, Joe has improved the lives of team members and citizens alike by developing strong budgets, sharing his expertise in finance, and identifying the most effective and efficient use of state resources. Plus, as anyone knows who's ever worked with him, with all this knowledge, he's still just one heck of a nice guy. Where are you, Joe? Please stand and let's give you your acknowledgement. Right up here. There he is. Thank you, Joe Morissette. Our strategy-driven executive budget leverages investments in infrastructure, community, economic development for the future, reduces taxes for workers now, while tackling our number one barrier to economic growth, our workforce challenge. Every company, every state is now competing for workforce. States will grow or prosper, or they will decline and shrink based on if they can attract and retain talent to live and work in their states. Today's workforce can choose which state they want to live in, and likely any job of their choosing will be there waiting for them. They get to choose their location first and the job second. This is a totally new environment. In this competitive environment, we are proposing an integrated and comprehensive workforce investment across all agencies and programs of $167 million. And as always, we must remember to measure our success not by the inputs that go into state agency budgets, but rather by the outcomes. To that end, over the past year, again, we've engaged in a comprehensive strategic planning process and a budgeting process where strategy drives the budgets, not the other way around. Budgeting in today's complex global environment is just super hard, and it's super complex, and it's full of challenges and opportunities. And North Dakota right now, on the plus side, is attracting a level of economic investment in value-added energy, value-added agriculture, technology, beyond anything we've ever seen in recent history. Tens of billions of dollars lined up to come into our state. And just over the last 2 years alone, in the soybean sector, of $1 billion of private sector investments in new soybean processing plants. However, we've also, on the hard to budget side, we've experienced a period of historically high inflation not seen in our country in 40 years. And inflation combined with this chronic and long-term workforce shortage in both the private and the public sectors, it creates new budgeting challenges that require innovative solutions. On the revenue side of budgeting, global instability and supply uncertainty and US federal policies that are literally designed to try to kill the fossil fuels industry had this effect of sending oil prices skyrocketing, which for North Dakota generated an abundance of oil tax revenues. But also we were hit with high inflation as it drove up prices for goods and services, which in turn increased our sales tax revenue while also pushing up wages. Higher North Dakota oil prices also increased the income taxes that we receive from mineral royalty owners. But as a result, our general fund revenues are running well ahead of the forecast that was issued just before you adjourned on your last regular session in April of 2021. When we look at this abundance of state tax revenue, we must recognize that it comes at the expense of taxpayers who are paying more for goods and services and having to work longer hours to make ends meet. That's why it's so important, now more than ever, to both invest our dollars wisely for the future, but also quickly provide real, meaningful tax relief to all income earners. While our general fund budget has grown since 2017 when we worked together to reduce it, again, that was an interesting time. We had to reduce the general fund by $1.7 billion from $6 billion down to 4.3 or 28%. Historically never achieved before. But under today's proposed budget for the 2023 to 2025 general fund, amazingly, we're still spending $162 million less as a state in our general fund than we were 8 years ago, than we were 6 years ago when Brent and I took office. I doubt there's a state in the nation that has gone through the kind of economic growth that we have that is spending less in their general fund today. So again, congratulations to this legislature for restrained and conservative spending. And as we prepare for this budget, I'm pleased to report that our state's balance sheet has never been stronger. Oil tax revenues running 60% or $1.5 billion ahead of the legislative forecast from the spring of 2021. It's projected to end this biennium at over $6 billion, coming in very close to the record set back in 2013 and 15. And with 8 months left in the biennium, this current budget cycle is projected to yield the second highest oil tax collections for sure. We'll pass the previous second high before you adjourn in the spring. On the general fund side of revenues, the four tax types there, we're running 23% or 660 million ahead of forecast. If you dig deeper into that general fund revenues, it's across the board. Sales tax revenues up 16%, individual income tax 13% ahead. Corporate income tax revenues are remarkable, 128% above forecast. And those major tax types, those three plus motor vehicle excise taxes, we're expected to collect more than $500 million more this biennium than last from those tax types. Our financial position from a cash standpoint, super strong. $718 million in the budget stabilization fund, a projected $1.1 billion unassigned in the Strategic Investment and Improvement Fund, or SIF, which is basically our second general fund or another checking account. Over $1.4 billion expected for the general fund ending balance on June 30 this next spring. And then, of course, on July 1, when we transfer in the legacy earnings, $486 million. So you can literally add these numbers up and see that there'll be about $3 billion of cash in the accounts when we're starting this session, when we're starting the next fiscal year, next July 1st. When we think about budgeting going forward, you've heard this from us before. In the spirit of transparency, we are once again proposing to use $1 billion in oil tax revenue in our general fund. We can get there a number of different ways. One way to get there is through the $400 million transfer from SIF and increasing our oil tax allocation revenue from $400 to $600 million. But the point really is that we have, for the last 12 years, included about $1 billion of oil tax revenue in the general fund. This used to be 25% of the general fund. Now it's less than 1/6. This is a reasonable and conservative amount and transparent in terms of how we're using oil tax revenue to fund our government. And while on the topic of transfers, our revenues are strong enough that we've also got a proposal in here that we should not be needing to draw profits from the state mill and elevator or the Bank of North Dakota. We don't need them to fund other things. We don't need them to balance the general budget. You just heard me describe the huge ending balances that we're going to be having. And therefore, we propose a one-time pause in these profit transfers, allowing these state entities to reinvest their profits in their missions of serving North Dakotans. And when they do that, if they transfer the money and we leave it in SIF or the general fund, it earns low interest checking account returns. If we leave the money in the bank and in the mill, they can go out and get 14, 15% return on invested capital as they also work to deliver value for North Dakotans. So we recommend this smarter cash managed approach also as when it comes to how we fill our rainy day fund, officially known as the Budget Stabilization Fund. Currently, this fund carries a maximum balance by law equal to 15% of all general fund appropriations, or for this biennium that we're in right now, the cap is $752 million. It's intended to be there on a rainy day fund in case we have a shortfall of revenues. But the current rules that mandate that 15% does not take into account the fact that now we've got a huge chunk of our general fund is actually K-12 education, and K-12 education also has its own rainy day fund. So we're double counting these reserves, which are then also held in these low interest bearing accounts. This matters in a period now when interest rates are higher. We're losing money every time we leave money in low interest bearing accounts. So we should streamline the Budget Stabilization Fund by capping it at only 15% of the ongoing general fund appropriations. Eliminate that double counting. We still have the K-12 with their own rainy day fund, have it reserved. But you know what this would do? The combination of these two things, this would bring our stabilization fund down to $602 million. Next year, it would be as high as $880. This frees up $280 million of funding for all of you to be using for things that have a higher return on investment than our citizens. Then our citizens didn't want us to collect their taxes and then just sit on cash and put them in low interest bearing accounts. They expect us to manage those investments wisely. So our proposed changes frees up capital, improves earnings on cash, and these changes are conservative and they're proactive. they're transparent, they avoid double counting, and they help our state institutions get higher returns for our citizens. For the next biennium, we're also project a general fund ending balance of $410 million. By the way, the current biennium, we were projecting an ending balance of 600. So this is one of the highest ending balances ever projected. Again, this is part of this conservative forecast. When we add the budget stabilization fund at the new cap level of 602 would mean we'd have available reserves of over $1 billion. With these backstops in place, we're proposing a general fund budget of just under $5.9 billion. The massive influx of federal and special funds, formula-driven increases, historic inflationary costs have pushed the overall two-year budget proposal to $18.4 billion. And with a high rate of inflation, creating higher operating costs, supply chain issues, workforce shortage, full of recruiting and compensation challenges, increased budgets are to be expected. Any business in our state understands that they're facing increased budget pressures. But we look around at other states and see what their total budget increases have been. Montana for this year, 9.1%, 12.7% in Idaho, 11.6% in South Dakota. All of this are similar, right in the ballpark of what we have here in North Dakota on the top line for all of the federal, special, and general fund increase of 11.5%. But it's important to note that if those of you that think that that increase is too high, then 56% of this budget is driven by funding formulas that were established by the legislature to support education, long-term care, and Medicaid. So if people want to dig into those formulas, jump right in. There may be some opportunities there. Achieving meaningful permanent tax relief. We are so fortunate to be in the position that we're in to make investments in our state's future. The bottom line is our state is doing just incredibly well. As I said at the beginning, we are blessed as a state compared to virtually every other state. But when our state is doing well, the citizens should also share in that prosperity. To accomplish this, our budget includes income tax relief that will eliminate the state individual income tax for 3 out of 5 taxpayers. Those who will still pay income tax, the top 40% of payers, will see their liability reduced by roughly 1/4 to 1/2. This allows North Dakotans to keep more of their hard-earned money to offset the expenses that they're seeing with inflation and to invest in their families and in their communities. Every North Dakota income taxpayer will benefit from this plan, which is why it's called the Relief for All. It will make North Dakota the lowest flat tax state in the nation. Having just been at Governor's Association meeting, I know that everybody's trying to get on the list. Iowa's bragging about cutting theirs from 8.5% to try to get down to 5% to get on this list. Arizona's not on this list, but they just passed legislation that gets them down to 2.5%. So they're already, it hasn't even been implemented, and they're talking about being the lowest flat tax place in the nation. But what this does is it puts us on a path towards eventually zeroing out our individual income tax and joining these 8 states that don't have individual income tax. These include some of the nation's fastest growing states in the southern part of our country. They compete, those on this list, we compete for energy workers like Alaska, Texas, and Wyoming. We compete directly for workers from those states, and also our neighbor in South Dakota. Getting on this list should be a priority for the state of North Dakota because if this relates back to attracting workforce. And it's not just private sector. Talk to General Al Dorman about how we're losing military personnel to other states that have 0 income taxes. We're grateful to Tax Commissioner Brian Krauss, along with Representative Hedlund, Senator Meyer, Senator Kanianen, Representative Bosch, Representative Doctor, for their leadership on this really exciting proposal. This plan expands upon the income tax credit package passed by this body, which was introduced by Representative Heinert, which you approved in last November and was signed into law. We also signed legislation last session, thanks to the leadership of Majority Leader Hogue, that exempts Social Security from state income tax. This will provide an estimated $4.6 million in much-needed tax relief per biennium to North Dakota's approximately 20,000 retirees. We are deeply grateful to the legislators who supported last year's income tax packages to provide meaningful relief to our citizens. The proposal in front of you now will build upon that relief and allow North Dakota working families to keep more of their paycheck in their pockets. To show working families that we understand their plight and that tax relief is a priority for this assembly, we urge you to expedite income tax relief legislation and make it one of the first bills to cross my desk. Now is the right time to provide meaningful, permanent income tax cut to make our state a more attractive place to live and work, and a more attractive place for workers to move to. It's real reduction in taxes, real reduction. It actually reduces the revenue coming into the state of North Dakota. It's going to help us retain both workers and military members, and it benefits us all. Let's get it done. We share and recognize concerns about high property taxes and the burden they place on residents in some of our communities. And I say some, not all, because some of you live in communities that have done a great job of limiting property tax burden on their residents. This is a tangible and super important reminder that property taxes are not even across our state. They're set and managed at the local levels. The decisions of cities, counties, schools, park districts, and others drive those levels. It's impossible to pass legislation at the state level and know the effect it's going to have at the local level, to even know if it's actually going to lower taxes. Legislatures at other states have tried and dearly tried and exhausted every option to address property taxes with state subsidies, with valuation caps. Almost always the history of this shows that unintended negative consequences and disappointing results. And we don't even have to look to other states. We can look here in North Dakota. From 2007 to today, 17 pieces of legislation have passed, resulting in $7.25 billion of property tax relief. And yet property taxes continue to rise in some communities, not all, some communities, which reinforces the old refrain, which we should all remember. Because if we're reducing local property taxes by using other state taxes and sending them locally, we're actually subsidizing local spending. We're not reducing taxes, we're subsidizing local spending. And if you want more of something, you subsidize it. So when we subsidize local spending, we get more local spending. By continuing to subsidize property taxes, we're growing local government. The numbers and the facts show this. Nearly 6 years ago, in my first State of the State address, I stood right here at this podium, and part of that address, I warned that property tax buy-downs, at that time, the 12% buy-down, were nothing more than a subsidy that entices communities to make a long-term investments that they may be ill-equipped to afford. I suggested that the legislature find an off-ramp to remove itself from the business of the unsuccessful 12% property buy-downs. And the legislature did, and that was a smart move. So are we for reducing the costs that drive up property taxes? All the decisions and design decisions at the local level? Absolutely. Let's dig into the real drivers that raise property tax. We're in favor of understanding and lowering the cost of local government. But are we for subsidizing more local spending by taking dollars from one set of taxpayers and sending them to property owners? We're absolutely not in favor of that. Let's address the real root cause. In the meantime, it's entirely appropriate for those of you, because I know that during campaign season, many of you told me that you heard from our citizens that they were more concerned about property taxes than income taxes. That may be true based on what city you lived in and what doors you were knocking on. But I would encourage all of those constituents to engage. If they're big property owners, engage with their school boards, engage with their city commissions, engage with the county commissions, their park boards, and learn more about how local property taxes in their area are set and managed, because it varies all over our state. Promoting quality education. Well, the share of locally leveled property taxes to go toward public schools, it's the state that covers the majority of that cost of public education. This is another way that we're also supporting and helping reduce local property taxes. K-12 accounts for the single largest component of our budget. Nearly $2.3 billion of our general and special funds will go towards K-12. That is real relief on property taxes, $2.3 billion again this session in helping to pay for that local school component. In this budget, we also recommend an increase in the per pupil rate. We know that schools have been hit with inflation and labor cost changes as well. And so in our proposal, it's 4% for the first year and 3% for the second year. This doesn't mean that that's what the raises are for instructors. This means that that's what the increase would be to go to the school district. This will bring the formula payments to record levels, nearly $11,000 per student. North Dakota invests $7 million in taxpayer dollars per day to educate our students. Last session, the legislature and our administration together demonstrated support for educators by requiring that 70% of the new dollars approved for K-12 be spent on compensation for those teaching our more than 116,000 students in our state. We're doing that again in this budget. 70% of that increase should go towards teachers, paraprofessionals, others that are in the classroom educating those 116,000 students. If we do this, we can get salaries up, but also make sure that we're being smart about the costs of delivering education in our state. Also, currently the K-12 funding formula does not fully recognize students in growing districts. This is called the on-time payment. We pay on the prior year's number of students. After the 2019 session, we began a 7-year transition to on-time funding to ensure that school aid is based on this year's enrollment number, not last year's enrollment number. We need to accelerate the shift. 7 years is too long. We've got districts, the 3 W's, Williston, Watford City, West Fargo, each of them hundreds and hundreds of new students coming each year. And then they don't get any payment for those new students. They're getting paid on the last year's numbers. The flip side is that when we pay on last year's number, in some of our declining districts, we're actually paying for students that aren't there. And so our proposal addresses this challenge. We need to adjust the formula to provide on-time funding to recognize either the growth or the decline. We just have to be honest about where the growth is and where the decline is, ensure that our resources are available to meet student needs. The K-12 funding formula has gone through multiple iterations in the past decade, and yet somehow here we stand today, 54% of our school districts are still not on the formula. That's, I guess, going to be a signal that there's something that isn't quite right. Well, we need a plan to move all districts onto a formula in time. We propose to first address what is called the transition districts that are currently below, and in some cases well below, that $11,000 per pupil payment. There are 11 school districts that have a combined enrollment of 4,440 students. The majority of these are Native American students, but these are not tribal schools. These are North Dakota public schools, North Dakota citizens, and we need to correct this inequity by getting them up to the level that we pay all the other schools. Like K-12, our higher education system is critical to addressing our workforce challenges and creating strong communities. To compete in the global market and ensure that our universities are responsive to the private sector, responding to those demand signals, we propose a workforce innovation grant. By investing $10 million in this competitive grant program, we can support the institutions that are able to create new programs or alter existing programs that are based on the urgent workforce needs as described by the private sector. We also need to build upon successful programs like the Higher Education Challenge Grants. Many of you are familiar with this. This is a grant driven by private sector investment. Since its inception in 2013, the state has put only $72 million into the Challenge Grant program. And I say only, but it's resulted in a combined private-public investment in higher education of $220 million for scholarships, research, endowed chairs, and other allowable items. When we have a program that gets $3 of private sector for every dollar of state money, we should be driving, that should be a demand signal to us, say, let's get more money in those programs because we leverage the state taxpayer dollar to get even more for us, get back for our citizens. Given this program's success, our budget proposes $50 million of challenge grants, which will drive another $100 million in private sector. And if the private sector sees things they want to invest in higher ed, we will have that demand signal. We will know what the private sector is looking for from higher ed because they're putting their money behind it. One of the most impactful actions taken last year to address workforce was the appropriation of $88 million in matching funds for private sector investment to create career center academies where high school students can pursue high demand careers in the trades, tech, healthcare, and other sectors. The North Dakota State Board for Career and Technical Education awarded $68 million in matching funds already to 13 of these projects around the state. I'm sure you're familiar with them. We're excited about them. They're going to make a difference. They all require a local dollar-for-dollar match. Several communities have stepped up. They've already raised all the matching funds. But the U.S. Treasury continues to deny the release of the federal dollars that were appropriated here in this legislature due to a debate over funding criteria. To address our immediate workforce challenges, it's critical that we don't allow the federal inaction to delay our state's progress. We urge this assembly to quickly honor the commitment that was made by the previous assembly, provide the authority for these CTE programs to borrow from the Bank of North Dakota, get their projects going, avoid delays in construction, start helping solve our workforce issue, and then we can backfill and pay that loan when we get paid by the feds. These career academies are just one of the many tools in the workforce toolbox we're asking this assembly to support. Based on input from North Dakota's Workforce Development Council, which has broad representation, over 30 members across multiple industries, all levels of government, we're recommending a package of proposals called North Dakota Works Investment Plan. This plan includes $20 million for a competitive regional workforce impact program for local communities, economic development groups, and others addressing labor demands. It also provides nearly $25 million for strategic marketing and recruiting campaign, which will include support for expanding the Find the Good Life campaign and virtual job fairs, in addition to other initiatives. Find the Good Life campaign, by the way, is not just an ad campaign. We actually get the names of people that are interested in moving to our state, and they tell us, I want to move there in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. Then we can start identifying the issues that are blocking them from moving here, whether it's housing or childcare or other support. So great program, we got to get behind it, because I said we're competing with other states. We need in-migration from other states to help us fill these roles, and we have an opportunity to do that. Supporting workforce and families. We know that the lack of available, affordable, and quality childcare, those three things, availability, affordability, and quality, is key to it's a major barrier to workforce participation if we don't have these childcare solutions solved. In many cases, parents are having to choose between working and paying for childcare, or not working at all. Currently, childcare costs account for 15 and up to 40% of the average household budget in North Dakota, which often simply isn't sustainable for young working families. By investing in childcare, we can make it easier for North Dakotans, especially young families just beginning their careers, to participate in the workforce, to help grow our economy, support our local businesses in communities. This past September, we were deeply grateful to have partners in Representative Stanford, Steeman, Matt Ruby, Nelson, Strinden, Belts, O'Brien, Schreiber, Beck, Mitskog, and Senators Patton, Lee, Davison, and Kroon, and GNDC President Eric Spencer, all with us together in person, announcing a framework for childcare legislation for this assembly to consider. These recommendations represent an investment of roughly $76 million through programs addressing affordability, availability, and quality. These proposals are based on more than 14 months of work and deep discussions with childcare providers, business leaders, parents, the Workforce Development Council, legislators, and other key stakeholders. Still, to truly solve this workforce challenges, we must hit this from every angle. As a major employer and top driver of our state tax revenues, it's critical, absolutely critical, that we work to fill open jobs within our oil and gas sector. When we lose oil and gas workers to Texas and the Permian, less rigs are working in North Dakota. It's happening right now. We're short of frac crews and drilling rigs. Our revenue, as great as it is, would be higher, would be a record if we had had more labor in our state in the last 18 months. By creating a $10 million energy scholarship pilot program, we can offer a tool to compete with other states to attract and retain not only energy workers, but also their families. You've heard me talk about the 35,000 open jobs in North Dakota, but even if every graduate from every high school and every graduate from each of our 11 universities and everyone on unemployment, which is the lowest it's been in 15 years, if everyone who's formerly incarcerated and coming out of our correction system this next year, if every one of them took a job in North Dakota, we would still be close to 13,000 jobs or more unfilled. Part of the solution has to be childcare, because we have people that are trained, educated, and at home and not in the workforce. It's probably childcare is the one thing that can get people back into the workforce the quickest. And if people want to stay home and be with their kids, we support that. We are a family-friendly state, but if people want to work and can't because of childcare, we've got to fix it. But on the math problem, the gap that we have on the slide that's showing right now, you can see that we have to have in-migration. If everybody here got a job, we would still not have everything filled. The other thing that we have to understand is we have to follow the lead of agriculture. Agriculture has, for the last 100 years, embraced automation. They've embraced it at scale. They've embraced it in every way. So whether it's services or manufacturing or continuing in government, we have to embrace automation. Not everybody is going to want to live, surprisingly, in North Dakota. We have an opportunity to create better, higher paying jobs with the use of automation. Let's expand the successful automation tax credit to $5 million for the next biennium. We should also incent industries to adopt automation through a $10 million automation enhancement matching grant program. And finally, we propose investing $5 million in workforce transition training to help retain and upskill citizens who've been provided a new opportunity through automation. We have to also work with our universities. It's not about if we have 10 welding jobs open, instead of having 10 more welders, how about we train someone to run a robotic welder and help the company buy the robotic welder to do the work of 10. This is the kind of automation that raises the quality of the job the person's doing. It enhances the bottom line of the companies, and it helps us solve a workforce thing because we just get more productive here in North Dakota, something that we've always done. The key to automation is making more work more meaningful for North Dakotans, helping citizens climb the ladder of opportunity. We also recommend nearly doubling the size of the Native American Scholarship Program, which is available to enrolled members of the federally recognized tribes, including the 5 tribal nations with whom we are honored to share geography. Doubling this program to nearly $1 million would be the largest investment in the program's history, will help support our important tribal colleges across the state, but it still won't meet the current demand. But if you think this is just a government idea, this follows the lead of one of our great companies who's been operating in our energy sector since 1951, Hess Corporation. They just announced this fall a new $14 million fully private sector apprenticeship program to expand educational opportunities and employment opportunities for tribal members across North Dakota. To attract and retain state team members in this increasingly competitive market during this time of high inflation in wages and services, we need to offer a competitive total rewards package for state team members. Last year, we formed a total rewards task force that looked at team members' compensation, their well-being, their benefits, their development, and the recognition they received in the jobs. This task force found that state government compensation is just here in our own state, up to 10% below what North Dakota counties and cities are offering. Recent increases given by other states and cities are far below the 2% that our North Dakota state team members are receiving this biennium, because last time we were here, it covered 2 years, 2%, 2%. So at a time where inflation is, going skyrocketing, our state employees are this year getting a 2% increase. South Dakota, Idaho, Kentucky, all this year moved to give 6 to 8% increases this year, plus special adjustments. Arizona just gave a 10% general increases to state team members with a 20% increase to their correction staff. Our state has faced periods of high inflation before. State government has adjusted accordingly. Back in the early 1980s, the last time we had inflation this high, in 81 and 82, when the annual inflation rate was over 10%, North Dakota state team members received general salary increases of 8% and 9%. North Dakota's unemployment tied for the 3rd lowest in the nation at 2.3. However, turnover in state government in 2021, just in that 1 year, 14%. That's a 14-year high. We've already discussed the high inflation rate, but given those factors, we're proposing a significant increase in human capital to keep our state operations running and running well. First is we propose a $90 million in targeted pay equity funding based on data-supported analysis to bring targeted agency salaries, including higher education, closer in line with overall market. We can't start applying percentage increases if everybody's out of balance at the starting line. We have to first go in with the dollars to get everybody matched up with where they are against the private sector. This will make us more competitive when we're trying to recruit for critical positions. Let's just take state radio, for example. 911 dispatchers, often referred to as the first responders, need to answer the call 7 by 24 by 365. Even in North Dakota, there's amazing stories of they guide citizens through life and death situations. But since 2019, state radio has been fully staffed only once for about a month. With an average turnover rate of 33%, they've had a constant hiring and training process. The starting pay for our entry-level dispatchers and supervisors is the lowest among their peers, including dispatch centers in Bismarck, Fargo, Grand Forks, Minot, and in South Dakota. It's more important than ever to develop compensation solutions that are at least on par with competitors and market that help us attract and retain top talent. In addition to the targeted pay equity funding, we recommend performance increases of 6% in the first year of the biennium and 4% in the second year. This would represent those increases, the 6 and 4 would represent an investment in our workforce of $211 million. If we don't make that investment, we'll spend more than that on training, recruiting, and rehiring as we lose the talent that's out here. That's an investment in our future. For health insurance, we recommend no changes to the state plan and that the state cover the 15% increase that's coming in the premium amount. That alone, because we pay 100% of the state health, will be another $78 million. So we've got a compensation across benefits and pay totaling nearly $300 million. Through our strategic reviews, we also identified the need for additional FTEs in some key priorities to deliver the level of services that North Dakota's citizens expect and deserve. North Dakota's population grew by 16% the last decade, the fourth fastest growing state in the nation. And yet, this biennium, we actually have 125 fewer FTEs in state government, not counting higher education, than when Brent and I took office in 2016. We've been able to make it through multiple bienniums with budget constraints and being smart of positions being cut and removed and consolidated because they, and adding workload for existing team members. We've done all those tricks for 6 years. This year, we do have in our budget recommendation a much needed 3.1% increase in positions across state government in targeted areas. In most cases, it only brings the staffing levels back to where we were in 2015 and 2017. We must also ensure that we can meet our obligation to team members, past and present, who are enrolled in our state pension plan. On July 1, financial report for our main retirement plan shows that the state pension fund had an unfunded liability of nearly $1.9 billion. To move the pension towards a fully funded status, we propose a one-time $250 million injection into the pension fund.